Hi everybody, it's Janét Kniss. Welcome back to Lectin Free Solutions. Today I've got another really great heart healthy recipe for you, and not only is it heart healthy, but it's super delicious. This is a really interesting little recipe. I actually learned to make this recipe, or a similar one, when I was about 10 years old. So you can imagine this recipe has been floating around for quite a long time. Anyway, it is packed full of good polyphenols with chocolate, and it has lots of walnuts, so it will help make the inside of your vascular system slick. And it also, for gut health, it has Non Gmo Allulose that your gut buddies absolutely love. And when you taste this, you are not going to believe that this is something that could help you with heart health. So anyway, we're going to get going. The first step is going to be to melt a little bit of unsweetened chocolate, so we'll do that now. Okay, here we are with the unsweetened chocolate bar. This is a Baker's 4-ounce bar. You can use this, or you can use a bar of Godiva. That works well. Or another, you can use a candy bar that's 90% or more, and that will also work. So what I have this in a double boiler with 1/4 cup of olive oil, and we will let that simmer in here, or just sit in here until it is all melted and ready to go. We will take this off from the heat as soon as the bar is completely melted, and let it sit for a few minutes so that it's cool enough to add an egg to it. Okay, that's the first step. All right, we're all ready with our cooled off chocolate. You know, it's easiest to do this in one bowl. So since I am using the double boiler to melt my chocolate, I'll go ahead and mix everything in my pan rather than having to get another bowl out. If you're nuking yours in the microwave to melt it, just use the bowl, use that bowl. No sense dirtying up a whole lot of extra bowls, is what I say. You know, it's always hard to do that tiny as you go. All right, so we have one 4-ounce bar of unsweetened chocolate. To that, we added 1/4 cup of extra virgin organic olive oil, and it's at room temperature now, so I can safely add the egg and the other ingredients. So we're going to start off with 1 cup of Non Gmo Allulose, 1 egg, and I have actually 2 teaspoons of my homemade vanilla. So we're going to add all those together, mix that thoroughly. You can beat that egg ahead of time if you want to, but I find it's not really that necessary in this recipe. I generally do that, but this is almost, you know what, it almost reminds me of a brownie recipe, so it's fairly thick. Okay, now we've got the allulose, the vanilla, and the egg mixed together. Now we're going to add the flour. So we've got 1 cup of cassava flour, 1/2 teaspoon of iodized sea salt, and 1/2 teaspoon of corn-free and aluminum-free baking powder. I try really hard to use the corn-free. I always use aluminum-free, but I always try to get the corn-free because my mom has a gluten-like reaction to corn, and a lot of us do. So it's better if you can not to use that. Okay, now we're going to add the flour and the baking powder and the salt. And we're going to stir that all up. Now, the recipe says to add 1 to 2 tablespoons of milk. I use coconut milk for this, and sometimes you need it and sometimes you don't. And in this instance, I am going to need it. So I'm going to stop here and grab that out of the cupboard. Okay, I opened up a can of coconut milk, and I had to add 2 tablespoons. So whatever kind of milk you want to use, you can use. We can't use dairy in my family, and so I generally use. We can't use dairy, we can't use almond milk, so I generally use coconut milk or hemp milk, but use whatever you can use. And this is the texture that you want. It's almost like a brownie mixture. So once you get that all together, then you're going to add 6 ounces of chocolate chips, and these happen to be Lily's. You know, I recently bought another brand. I made these not very long ago, and they had a really funny aftertaste, and I thought that was so strange because I've made these cookies many times, and I've never had that happen. Well, it was the chips. So make sure that you use one that you know you like the flavor of, because it really is it really does overpower the flavor of your recipe. Okay, the other thing that we have is 1.5 cups of chopped walnuts. And I'll caution you that, I usually like big chunky walnuts, but in this recipe, you're better off to have them sort of a medium chop. You don't want them too large. Otherwise, when you go to make the cookies, since there's not a lot of dough, you have a hard time having them stick together. So better to chop them up a little bit smaller. And this is stiff. It's going to take you a few minutes, so I'm not going to bore you and make you watch the stirring of all this, and we'll come back when we get ready to put those on the cookie sheet. All right, I've got everything mixed in. Making these sort of brings me back to my childhood, and I can remember probably eating way more of these chocolate chips as I was baking them than I was supposed to, especially if I wasn't being supervised. I didn't do that today, but that can happen. Anyway, you can see it's a really nice thick dough. So what I'm going to do is make fairly small cookies, because these are very, very rich and you just don't need that much. So we'll start with about that shape. If they start to move around on you, just tighten them up with your fingers. I'll come back and push any chocolate chips in that have escaped. And, see, this one needs to have that happen. There's not as much dough as there is chips and walnuts, so they do need a little bit of adjusting. Okay, so this will be, this is about the size. I've got 3 across. You can do 4. And what we're going to do is I'll finish these. I have a couple trays I'm going to make. Generally, you get somewhere between, depending upon the size, you get generally around 3 dozen of these. I'll let you know exactly how many I ended up with when we're finished. And you're going to bake these at 325 degrees for 10 minutes. You may think that they're not done, but generally they are. You can try them for 12, but I usually find that's a little bit too long. So just sort of test your own oven. You want them, you don't want them overcooked. That's just not very good. All right, we're all finished with the cookies. It was 10 minutes for each tray. That's worked out perfectly. I did end up with 44 cookies, so basically 3.5 dozen. One thing that I did want to mention is that we like to eat these best cold. You don't have to eat them that way, but I think that they're tastier that way. So you can see this batch has been sitting here cooling for about 10 minutes, and you can see they have a little bit of a cake center, almost like a brownie, but not chewy like that. And it's mostly nuts and chocolate chips. They're pretty delicious and good for your heart. Isn't that wonderful? Anyway, thanks so much for stopping by. I hope you give this recipe a try. Let me know in the comments if you tried it and if you liked it. And I'll also have some other tips of different little variations that you can make. So check out the recipe in the more section in the recipe description. Thanks again.